President 𝗲𝗶𝗁𝗆 het onlangs aangekondig dat hy 'n nuwe adviserende paneel gaan aanwys om hom raad te gee oor hoe om swart ekonomiese bemagtiging op 'n breër skaal uit te rol en hoe om dit meer effektief toe te pas. Nou vir die algemene Suid-Afrikaner het dit die afgelope paar jaar baie duidelik geword dat swart ekonomiese bemagtiging nie gaan oor die bemagtiging van swart mense nie, maar eerder die verryking van 'n paar kaders met die regte politieke bande. Ek is Jacques Broodryk en welkom by seisoen 2 van Polities Inkorrek. My gas in die ateljee is een van die mede-aanbieders van die potgooi 𝗲𝗵𝗵𝗏. Ek gesels met Dumo Denga en ons praat oor swart ekonomiese bemagtiging. Dumo, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
So I think let's start off with some terminology before we get into the nitty-gritty of things. Now, broad-based black economic empowerment kind of has two facets to it. There's employment equity and then there's 𝗍𝗶𝗶𝗏𝗏. But often people use these terms kind of interchangeably. How do you define the difference between employment equity and black economic empowerment?
Right, okay. I'll start with employment equity. Employment equity, from my perspective, is basically some sort of law instruction to companies on how many people from each specific demographic group should be hired. So ideally, as you can see, they want majority black and then coloreds in 1% and so forth. So it's just a way of trying to match the natural demographic to a specific company. And then when it comes to broad-based black economic empowerment, from what I understand, it's basically a means for government or for companies to get contracts from the government, and then the government will decide who will actually get a specific contract based on their BEE rating. So if they're they're board members or managers and so forth of a certain skin color, which would be black in this case, then they're more likely to get it. And of course, this has caused a lot of controversy over time because we've seen that there are companies that were more efficient, offering a service for much cheaper, but they lost the contract, or they did not get it rather, because the competitor had, let's say, a better BEE rating. And obviously that has caused a lot of confusion, and people said, well, what's the point? Is it about saving money? Is it about black economic empowerment? Some people even think it's just those two options, but it's not necessarily the case, because you can have a situation where you have a company that is, let's say, black, for example, and they can offer the best service at the best price. It doesn't necessarily have to be that the black company is the more expensive one. It just shows how this can also be confused with companies that have a particular demographic structure. Those companies can compete and get the contracts that the government actually puts out. But there's no need to say that, well, it has to be, let's say, of a certain skin color and so forth, because that causes a lot of confusion over time.
Critics of these policies are often accused of either being racist or anti-transformational. In the case if it's a black person criticizing these policies, you often see very ugly slurs like coconut being thrown around. How do you respond to criticism like that?
Yeah, I think when it comes to responding to those types of criticism, I think people need to understand what is the bigger picture. Because you see, the thing is that it's not necessarily the case that the government has to support a business that's of a certain skin color and stuff like that. What really needs to be understood is that the government is using tax money here when they are giving these contracts out to people. And if these contracts are going out to people that cannot do the job and also are charging a higher price, let's assume, just for the sake of argument, that all the companies are equally capable, right? But now you're going to give money to a company that is charging you more for a service that you could be paying cheaper somewhere else. I mean, we saw the same thing with South African Airways, for example, with the whole BNP Capital deal, where they found out that they were going to give BNP Capital about 250 million rand for something that they could get from another company for like 5 million rand. And the excuse that was used was that, well, it was because that company had a good BEE score. And obviously that is a massive problem. I think really when we go out to the shops and we buy something, we'll try to get the best bang for our buck. But when it comes to government, they're doing the total opposite. So it doesn't make logical sense. So I think what I would do, I'd steer it away from race and move it more towards about just saving money, spending prudently. Let's not be wasteful in our spending. And the problem with BEE is that it has encouraged wasteful expenditure. I think there was even another, in the state capture report, there was a quote from in there that read that BEE actually assisted in state capture because of the ambiguity that it created. It's like, yes, they want to improve, let's say, they want more black ownership and so forth. But then that ambiguity led to people within the government to actually benefit their friends or benefit people that are close to them who happen to be of the skin color that they prefer. And then as a result, that also encouraged the wasteful spending, further on. So I think, in my opinion, we have to move it away from race and say, look, let's just try to spend some money better, Maybe that's where we can start.
So in my personal opinion, these policies need to be scrapped and the free market should be allowed to do its thing. People should be given opportunities to participate in the free market, but it shouldn't be government's hand constantly trying to interfere everywhere. Apart from the fact that it stifles the markets and competitive spirit, we see corruption on a big scale and whatever. But a lot of people who disagree with me tell me that there is a need for redress from damages that were caused during apartheid, etc. And black economic empowerment is a way to address the redress issue. How do you respond to that?
Right. First of all, I have to say I agree with you. BEE should be scrapped. We don't need it. We need the free market. I think that's the best possible solution that we have right now. If we want to see better economic growth, we have to make it easier for people at the bottom of the economic rung to participate in the economy. But that doesn't mean government intervention. It means deregulation. So I agree with that. And then, so when it comes to redress, this is a very interesting topic because usually when you say you don't want BEE, the response would be, oh, so you're saying we must do nothing. There must be, nothing must be done to redress the past. Okay, so how you define nothing also matters here, because if you say that we should do nothing, in the sense that we just remove the laws, the discriminatory laws that we had in the past, I would say that would be sufficient. Now, if you want to talk about redress, the question is that, well, how do we, redress can mean anything. So for example, if you look at the land issue, for example, I think the solution of land restitution, in my opinion, is a good solution, and expropriation without compensation is a bad solution. So now if you want to talk about redress, I would say, well, redress would be the free market, right? You remove these old discriminatory laws that were there in the past, and then now you have the free market that actually takes over, and you can say that is redress. But people should also be very wary of the fact that I think also another assumption that is held by a lot of people that support BEE is that they think that the demographic structure of the country has to be represented in business. And unfortunately, such a situation does not exist anywhere else in the world. If you go to Malaysia, you'll find that Chinese Malaysians tend to earn the most, right? They tend to be the ones big in business. And you saw even in Uganda, when Idi Amin was still the president, the Gujarati and the Indians were the ones that were at the top of the economic ladder. So they shouldn't expect some sort of mirroring of the demographic within business. But what would happen if you allow for a free market is that you're going to have people living off better. The GDP per capita will go up. People's living standards will go up. So we need to look at it from that perspective as opposed to looking across racial groups, because the moment you start looking at across racial groups, you're going to have these idealistic tendencies coming in, and people are saying that, well, this race has so much, but they're the minority, it shouldn't be like that. That's a vision. It's not a reflection of reality. So I think we should also question that assumption. What makes us think that if you are part of a particular demographic group, that you should get these type of benefits and so forth. So I think that's how I would address the redress question. Implement the free market, that'll be a redress solution. And also we shouldn't have expectations that because the demographic structure is of a certain nature, then it should be reflected within business as well.
I think one of the other major issues with these policies is that it leads to a lowering of standards, right? So because the best man, whether he's a black guy or a white guy, but he doesn't have the right political connections, the best man doesn't get the job anymore. It gets given to someone with connections, and that's a major problem. But you made an interesting point now. So if you look at Uganda, and you also mentioned Malaysia, It's still those who kind of move close to political power who seem to get these deals and to seem to be in a higher economic class. Do you think that's a common misinterpretation? If not, how is there a way around that? How do you level out that playing field?
Right, that's a good question. I think when it comes to politics and economic power, it's a very interesting game, because if you are the one who has the power, and let's say you have absolute power, for example, you can kind of shape, well, not reality, but shape certain situations the way you want. So if you look at South Africa, for example,
like the mainstream media.
Yeah, there you go. So I think I think we should just be careful that political power does not necessarily mean economic power. If you look again, I'll give you another example. In the United States, you find that the highest earners are Asian Americans. They're not necessarily white Americans, and where they make up most of the population, a majority, over 50%. So I think that we should not think that those two are synonymous, but it is possible that one could have political power and economic power. But then when that happens, that usually happens when the state has a lot of control over the economy. And then the people that benefit, it may not be that they benefit someone who has the same skin color as them, or it might be someone that they actually find as a friend. So I even told people in some situations, you could have a situation where, let's say 25 years into the future, right? And then you've got, let's say, a black president, and he's got a party where there's other racial groups in there, and those people benefit. So it's not because of the race, it's just because of the power and who's affiliated with that power. And yes, in many situations, it may be that they may be of the same racial group, but it could also be totally different, you know? So, look at the Guptas. They benefited a lot from state capture. Technically they are South Africans, because they got their
They bought their passports.
Yes. Yeah. But look, they were affiliated with the president, and that's why they actually benefited, unduly benefited with those deals as well. So we should see it that way. Look at it from a power perspective. Shouldn't look at race. Yes, it could be that the guys that benefit are the same race, but that's not the reason. It's the power and the affiliation to power. Look at other political parties that are not affiliated with the ANC that are not benefiting from these deals. And I think that's a very good example of that. There are many majority black parties that don't benefit from BEE. It's people that are close to the ANC. I think the border post thing, I don't know if this is true or not, you guys can correct me, but I remember there was that thing that Patricia de Lille was supposed to build, a border fence, and it looked like a washing line.
Yeah, I've seen that up close. It's a joke. It's an absolute joke.
Right. Yeah. And she's not particularly black, if you would say. But look, that tender, probably she benefited from it big time.
Well, nowadays you can identify as whatever you'd like, right? So yeah. I'm guessing we should ask her before we make assumptions about her identity. But anyway.
Right.
So I think even if you take the argument that black economic empowerment policies are justified, right? I'm not saying I'm taking that stance, but even if I'm playing devil's advocate here,
right,
then I think there should have been a cut-off date since the ANC came into power to say, like, we're going to implement these policies up to a certain point. This is how long we have to turn things around. But that was never done. Do you think we're ever going to get rid of these policies as long as the ANC can use it as a negotiating chip during election time?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if they'll ever get rid of it. But if you have a cutoff date, the problem with the cutoff date is that when you implement a cutoff date and you reach that date, they're going to extend it. They're going to keep on extending it. We saw at the state of disaster, they're always going to keep on extending it because they'll say, we never reached our goals. And like, what is the goal? And you'll find that
goalposts keep shifting.
Exactly. So, yeah. And the goal will be so abstract and so, it's not tangible. So untangible that by the time it can never be reached. So they'll say, they'll say, for example, that we will end this thing when everything has been fully addressed. That is so vague. Like, you cannot get, how do you know when it's been addressed? How do you know it's been fully addressed? And they don't want to be specific because the moment they become specific, they'll be held to that. And they may even sabotage things so they don't achieve that objective. So you make it as vague as possible. so that, if you do get held to account, it'll be very difficult to do so. And also it gives you a lot of playing room as a leader just to keep these policies in place so that your friends can benefit. So I think in my opinion, will these policies ever go? I think over time people may get tired of it, and if the government, let's say, loses their legitimacy, I think it may reach the point where people are not even going to care about government contracts. So if someone can see they can make more money somewhere else, they'll rather go there. And then the government will just be having a smaller pot to play with. But then the problem with that is that the government, they can easily go to parliament and then create a new law that probably nationalizes these industries that are making more money than them. So that could be the case. So I don't think that it will be scrapped entirely, but I think the relevance of it can be so bad over time that people will just not think of getting a government contract. Yeah.
Dumo, thank you very much for your time. It was a great discussion.
Thanks.
𝗲𝗎𝗁 gedink het 28 jaar na die geboorte van die nuwe Suid-Afrika sou daar steeds regeringsbeleid gewees het wat teen mense diskrimineer gebaseer op hulle velkleur. Terwyl die ANC die belastingkoffers leegsteel met behulp van beleid soos swart ekonomiese bemagtiging, is daar toenemende oproepe vir 'n belastingboikot. Nou dit kan natuurlik 'n ewige neeweffekte vir die ekonomie in die land inhou. En die vraag is, gaan die ANC regering hierdie rooi ligte betyds raak sien en gaan hy homself daarin steur? Ek is Jacques Broodryk, tot volgende keer.